in the last class, we studied about the classification of law, like how the law of tort comes under the private law, and then we discussed about the basics of law, like from where the term tort was derived, as we saw that it derived from the term tortum, which means twisted or wrong. Then we learned about the introduction of tort, the definitions given by different jurists. Then we discussed about what do we mean by right in rem and right in personam. So how what taught exactly is right in rem, because it is the duty imposed upon persons in general. Right in personam is between two personal people, which is dealt in Contract Act. Then we discussed about the common definition of tort, which is civil, like tort is a civil wrong, and it is other than a breach of contract for which relief may be obtained in the form of damages or injunction. And then we talked about what is the difference between tort and contract. As to tort, here it is unliquidated damages, and in contract there is liquidated damages, that is predetermined damages and privity of contract. Then we talked about what are the ingredients to constitute tort, like wrongful act, legal damages, and legal remedy. So wrongful act as to how right to property is there, right to bodily safety is there, reputation is there. And then legal damages, and we learned about injurious and damnum and damnum sign injuria. Tort is basically where there has been injury irrespective of damages. If there is no legal injury and only damages, then it won't attract tort. Then we talked about the legal remedy, that it you be just a remedium. And then we learned about the difference between tort and crime. Okay, so right now today we will be discussing about the justifications in tort or the defenses in tort. So uh generally, in this is our second demo class, this is going to be a second demo class. Here we will be discussing about the justification or defenses in tort, right? So we learned that tort is a civil wrong, where the in case if a person commits tort, then the plaintiff can claim compensation from the defendant, can sue the defendant and claim compensation for the damages of its legal rights. But then again, in law of tort, there are certain defenses or justifications that the defendant can give to the plaintiff in case the plaintiff sues the defendant for infringement of his rights or under the law of torts. Now, what are those defenses? Basically, there are these seven defenses. First is consent, second, act of God, third, inevitable accident, fourth, necessity, fifth, plaintiff's default, sixth, private defense, seventh, mistake. So in this class, in today's class of ours, we will be just having an overview of what exactly all these defenses means. We won't be discussing the case laws, but I will be, through help of some examples, will be trying to explain you how these defenses act. And in the subsequent classes, we will be discussing each of these defenses individually, and we will be discussing it with the help of the case laws which are available. Okay, so let's start. The first one is consent, sorry. The defense of yes.
Sir, can I call my friend? She
Yeah,
wants
sure.
to join.
Sure, sure.
So 1 minute.
Okay.
Sir, you can continue. She is not receiving.
Okay, fine. Just a second. Okay. So the first one is consent. So the defense of consent, or the defense of consent in law of tort, which is available, it is based on the principle of volunty non fit injuria. That means that if the plaintiff himself knowingly places himself in a position where he knows that harm might result, or some degree of harm might happen to him, he cannot later on claim compensation for the same under law of torts. So, for example, and this type of defense is known as a necessary evil for the defendant. Why? I will explain you. So, what this under this defense of consent, we mean that if the plaintiff knows that at this place, or at the whatever be the place here, if I give a consent over that place, then I might suffer some damages or injury. And even after knowing that, still I give consent and go to that place, and I get any harm, or I get certain damages. Later on, I cannot blame the defendant for the damages and claim damages from him. Like, I cannot blame the defendant to have caused that harm to me and claim damages from him. So the essential ingredients for the defense of consent are these: that first thing is, the plaintiff must be fully aware of the risk. That is, the plaintiff must have idea that what risk is going to be there. Second is, being aware about the risk, the plaintiff must have given consent for the same. And being from the legal field, we know that the consent must be voluntary, free, without any coercion, influence, or compulsion. And here another thing is that there shouldn't be any master servant relationship. And the next point is, the consent which is given, that must be for the harm which a reasonable person would have given consent for, or that plaintiff would have given for. If the consent which the plaintiff has given for a particular harm, but some other harm occurs to him, then the defendant cannot take the plea of defense of consent. Now let me explain with the help of some examples. For example, everyone whoever goes to a hospital for a surgery or operation, they fill a consent form in which they are told about the what are the possible outcomes or injuries that the patient may occur or face in case the surgery takes place. These are the reasonable risks that are there. And after reading the risks, once the patient puts his signature or gives his consent in that form to carry on his surgery, thereafter, if some reasonable damages, like whatever risks are there, if some of those risks happen even after taking due precautions by the defendant, then later on the plaintiff cannot sue the defendant stating that you have caused harm to me. So here the defendant can take the defense of consent, that yes, you were already aware about the risk. After being aware about the risk, you gave your own consent for the same, and after consent, right now you cannot blame me. But in the same case, well, coming to the fourth condition that I said, essential ingredient, that is the reasonable expectation. By this I mean that, for example, see, during the surgery, the patient would have given consent for the surgery of his kidney. But during the surgery of his kidney, the doctor, what he did, he removed the uterus of the patient along with the kidney. He treated the kidney, then he removed another body part of the patient, or or by mistakenly left his Caesar or forceps inside the body of the patient, due to which the patient later on, he happened to face troubles. Right now, the patient had given consent for the surgery, and the risk involving the surgery of a kidney. but the patient hadn't given the consent or knew about this risk, or it is not what a reasonable person would know during a course of surgery, that the doctor might leave the stencils or scissors or would remove another body part from the patient. So here the defense of consent won't cannot help the defendant, and the plaintiff can sue the defendant. Am I clear about this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, another part where I said that the consent of the plaintiff must be voluntary, free, and without any coercion. For example, and the master servant relationship, of course. Right now, say why I said that there shouldn't be a master servant relationship. It is because, let's take this example, that I am working for a, say, for a builder. Right now, the builder places me in a minefield and asks me to work over there. As I am the servant of the builder, he is my master, then I have to work over there. And there, something happened to me during the course of the work. Like I would be lifting or something, working, and all of a sudden, some stones or something fell on me. I got injured. In this case, the master cannot take the plea of consent because there is a master servant relationship, and here my consent is not free or without any force. It was because I was working under that person, I had to listen to him, right? But then,
Yes, sir.
again, there is another exception in this case, where if the defendant has taken proper precautions, proper care. For example, there has been a case where in a minefield, two people were working. Sorry, not in a minefield, but they were into some kind of building, some kind of explosives for the mining. Yeah, right. So while they were building those explosives, the defendant has provided them proper gear, proper protection, and that was the course of their work. But the two employees, what they did, without taking their proper care and protection, they started working with the mine. Even after being repeatedly told not to do so and to take proper precautions and harnessing, but they didn't do. And as a result, there was a explosion, and both of the employees got injured. Thereafter, they claimed damages from the defendant, claiming that it was because of coercion or compulsion. In that case, the court, what it decided is that here the defense of consent uh, will not apply, because here they cannot claim justification on the basis of that there was a master servant relationship, because no doubt that they were in a master servant relationship, but the defendant itself, he asked them to use proper harness, which was not used by the plaintiff, and they knowingly put themselves in the problem, right? So right now they cannot again blame the defendant for the same. Now coming to the next one, the act of God, which we also known as vis major. It means that the defendant will not be liable in case the injury is caused by the occurrence of an any unexpected and unforeseen event due to the natural force or act of God. So what are the essential ingredients of that? It is that it must be unforeseeable, it must be the result of any natural force, it must be extraordinary and unexpected, and the fourth one is it could not have been avoided even after taking reasonable care. Now, suppose, let's say, take this example that we are in Kerala. Kerala is famous for heavy rainfall, or Cherrapunji, say. Particularly, let's talk about Cherrapunji. Cherrapunji is famous for heavy rainfall during monsoon seasons. Now, right now, I am a person in Kerala, in Cherrapunji, and I know that there is going to be a heavy rainfall. Knowing about this fact, I didn't mend or repair my house, the walls of my house. And one day it was raining heavily. Normally, because heavy rainfalls usually occur in Cherrapunji, so it was normally a regular normal rain. It was raining, and two, three stray people were sleeping near the wall of my house. So, as because of the rain, the wall fell on them and they got hurt. Now they went and claimed, they went and filed a case for negligence against me. So can I take the defense of act of God?
No,
Yes. Why is it so?
because you could have built or taken care before, because
Yes.
you knew that rainfall is there.
Yes, because it was not unforeseeable or it was not extraordinary or unexpected. We know that in Cherrapunji, rain is bound to occur and it happens at a very heavy, there is a heavy pouring over there. So I should have taken proper care. But for example, say in some other place, say in Rajasthan, where we don't expect heavy rainfall at all, then all of a sudden a few people are resting near the building, a wall of my building, and all of a sudden heavy rainfall starts, and due to which my wall collapse and fall on those people, and those people then later on file a case against me claiming damages. In this case, I can take the defense of act of God, because here it was unexpected, it was extraordinary, and it was an act of nature, and it was unforeseeable. And even after taking reasonable care, it would have happened, because Rajasthan is not known to be having an extraordinary rain or a heavy rainfall. So this is what we mean by the defense of act of God. Now coming to the third part, the inevitable accident. uh, this defense is taken where there is an inevitable accident. Now, what does we mean by inevitable accident? The accident which cannot be by any means avoided. Unavoidable accident, we can say that. So what are the essential ingredients? There are two basic essential ingredients in this. First, such injury must not be foreseeable. Second, such accident could not be avoided by the defendant even after taking reasonable care. Now, let's take this example, like we are driving on we are going on a somewhere, and all of a sudden the tire of the car bursts. So it is an unavoidable accident, inevitable accident. One couldn't do anything, because it is not unforeseeable, it is not foreseeable. One cannot imagine and see that. And reasonable care, even after taking reasonable care, that accident would have happened, because bursting of a tire is not in the hand of a person. So here, if any person or property gets damaged because of this, and he claims damages against the defendant, then the defendant can take the defense of inevitable accident. Now, coming to the next, necessity. Now, this is very interesting. Necessity means in order to prevent a greater damage, we, if I do a smaller damage to the plaintiff, then I won't be held responsible for that. No, for example, in the middle of the night, I wake up and I see my house is burning, right? So I see my house is burning. So what I do is that I know that my neighbor, he has a big hose and a good throw of water. So what I do in the middle of the night, I suddenly just barge into his house, I take the hose and start trying to put down the fire. Now later on, what if that person, my neighbor, goes and uh, files sues me for trespassing, then I can take the defense of necessity, because if the house would have burned, then it would have even affected the entire society. Slowly adjoining houses would have even burned. So if I take this defense of necessity, in order to stop that burning fire, I didn't have the time to ask him get it. I knew he had. I just barged in, and in order to put down the fire, I used the hose. So here I can take the necessity. So here in this case, there should be only two choices. No third alternative choices should be there, and it should be a spontaneous act. For example, let's just change the situation a bit. All of a sudden, I wake up, my house is in fire, I see the fire brigade is there, and they are putting down the fire through their equipments to their hose. They are throwing water and trying to put down the fire. And I was standing, and all of a sudden I barged into my neighbor's home. I took the hose and started putting out the fire. Here the neighbor can sue me for trespassing, because all that was not a necessity for me to barge in and put out the fire, because already the fire people were trying to put out the fire by throwing water. So this is the difference between when necessity can be used as a defense and when necessity cannot be used as a defense. Okay, and before moving further, I just forgot to mention a very interesting case in this inevitable accident, which is quite landmark case. In this case, what happened? Two people, they went into a forest, used to shoot peasants. Okay, peasant hunters. So they went into a forest, and one person fired a gun. Looking at a targeting a peasant, he fired a bullet. So what that bullet did, instead of hitting the peasant, the bullet hit the branch of a tree and bounced back and hit his friend in his arm. So that friend, what he did was that he went and sued this friend and claimed damages. So here that person took the excuse of inevitable accident because it was never unforeseeable. It is unforeseeable that a bullet would hit a branch, then bounce back and hit his friend. So here the court accepted the plea defense of inevitable accident and did not give damages to the uh, uh, plaintiff. Okay, so am I clear till now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now coming to the next part is the plaintiff's default. It is usually based on the legal maxim ex turpi causa non oritur action. This means that if the harm is caused to the plaintiff as a result of his own act, the defendant cannot be made liable. Now, what does that mean? That the plaintiff, because of his own act, caused that harm. So here he cannot later on go and claim damages from the defendant. So how can we justify that it was the plaintiff's own act? For example, if the plaintiff knowingly, and it usually happens when there is an unlawful act. It doesn't have to be an unlawful act, definitely, but usually it happens because an unlawful act. And there should be, and the main ingredients of it is the plaintiff, the harm to the plaintiff must be the result of his own act, and that act, that particular act, should be the source of the harm caused to him, not because of any other uh, act following that act. Like for example, if I, because of some reason, try to uh, jump from the roof of my neighbor, then that is my own act. I cannot blame my neighbor that and I try to jump and or go to the terrace of my neighbor and I fall down because of the terrace being slippery or something. So later on I cannot blame the neighbor that your terrace was slippery, you were negligent and all. No, that was because of my own act. There was a similar, very similar and interesting case. In this case, what happened was that two thieves, they robbed a bank, and they were drunk, and they took a car and they started driving negligently. Okay, and they later on hit and had an accident, and then they started suing the person that yes, for you we had an accident. But here they themselves, they knew the consequences of the act. The court held that they knew the consequences of the act. The plaintiff, they knew that they were doing an unlawful act, they were robbing, they were drinking and driving negligently, and now they cannot go and claim damages from the other person or from the defendant. So here where there is plaintiff's default, here the plaintiff cannot go and sue the or claim damages from the defendant, right? So coming to the next part is private defense. We have heard about this private defense everywhere, like in criminal law even it's there. So basically private defense is kind of a basic right. So everyone has the right to protect his body and his property by using reasonable force right now. But in this case, or in this defense, one has to make sure that whether reasonable force was utilized or not. And the second thing is that whether there was an imminent or immediate threat. So what, let's take an example. I see a person trespassing my property, his bare hand, he comes into my property, and I see him, and I just see him trespassing my property. What I do is that I have a gun, I take that gun and shoot at him. So here it won't be an act of private defense, because that is not a reasonable force that I am taking, because he is barehanded, he just trespassed my property. I could have shouted at him, I could have pushed him, but instead of doing all this, I just took a gun and shot a bullet at him. So here I cannot take the plea of private defense. But at the same time, let's say a person trespasses my property and starts punching me. So what I do is that in order to protect myself, I just and overturn him and throw him on the ground, as a result of which he got hurt. In this case, I can take the claim of private defense, right? So then the next one is mistake. So we all know mistakes are divided into two parts: mistake of fact and mistake of law. And it's very clear that mistake of law is no excuse. Right now, if I go and kill someone and say that I didn't know that killing someone is a mistake, or I don't know that killing someone is prohibited in law or is a crime in law, then I cannot claim the defense that I killed that person by mistake of law. No. So mistake of law is no excuse, and so it cannot be taken as a defense. However, mistake of fact can be. But there is a very thin line of difference between how to distinguish whether there was a mistake of fact or not. Because in mistake of fact, the plaintiff and the defendant, here the defendant must sincerely believe, here I have mistakenly written the plaintiff, but it should be defendant. The defendant must sincerely believe about the fact, and he shouldn't have the intention to cause damage to the plaintiff, or to gain any profit from the plaintiff. So by this, what I mean was that there was a case of Usha, I think. Yes, Usha, the swing machine that prepares the swing machine and all electronic items even. So what they did was that that company, all of a sudden, it wanted to, it built a swing machine knowing that it was not properly working or is tampered. But what it did was that that company made a statement that it is working fine and all, and under the impression, the plaintiff bought that machine from the company, and later on, after finding the fault, filed claim damages. So here Usha cannot take a ground that yes, there was a mistake of fact, because Usha knew that there were certain defects. So the defendant had to sincerely believe that about the fact that the fact is correct without knowing that there was any defect. So here Usha would be held liable. Okay, so am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so here I discussed about, the seven types, but then I even read about another type, that is statutory authority. Okay, as a defense. For example, we know, every one of us know that when we go to an airport, the airport authorities or security personals have that right to frisk any person if they find any doubt or anything. So if all of a sudden the police personals or the airport personals frisk a person, and that person cannot go and claim damages that the at the airport the authorities frisked me, that hampered my reputation and all. No, that cannot happen. That, so statutory authority is also a defense available in law of torts. Now what does statutory authority means? It means that the authority of law, whenever an official or a person under the authority of law, under the authorization of law, does any act or omission in Yes, in accordance to law. So in that case, one cannot sue that person or claim damages for that person, even if the act of that officer is hampering or affecting or causing any damage to the plaintiff. However, the act which the officer or the person is doing, that should be within the authority of the law and according to the procedure that is laid down by law. For example, in case at the airport frisking, knowing that the person is, after frisking that person, still detaining him without any reason and without any justification, harassing him and without following the procedure of frisking, if they frisk that person, then the person can claim damages from the defendant, even if they are authorities of law or they are working under the uh, uh, law authorities, right? So am I clear about the general defenses of tort?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so any doubts or any
So can
question?
you please explain the first one? I was not there.
Okay, the first one, the consent.
Consent one.
Okay. The defense of consent is basically based on the concept of the legal maxim voluntas non fit injuria. That means that if a person willingly places himself, or if the plaintiff willingly places himself, being aware about the fact that yes, at this place I will be getting harmed, or I am myself going into harm's way, and I knowingly give my consent, then later on, when I get harmed or get hurt, I cannot claim damages from the defendant on based on that. So let me take a very simple example, like which happens in our day-to-day life. Right now, we all see cricket matches, right? So before we go to the stadium, we buy the tickets for the cricket match. So when we buy the ticket, there are, have you guys read about contract?
Yes, sir.
So have you heard about the term implied contract?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So,
sir.
and have you heard about that there in certain tickets and all, there are some standard contract terms and conditions. For example, have you ever read behind the back of any, pass or ticket, or any, if you are going for any rides in any amusement park? So there are certain conditions which are implied contracts and basic contracts or standard contracts. So there are conditions. So for example, when you buy the ticket for a cricket match, in the ticket itself, the ticket is itself a contract, right? So you are purchasing it with the consideration that with you will be entering and watching the match. So when you know that in the cricket match in the stadium, a batsman, if he hits a six, the ball might come and hit you in the stadium, and that happens a lot of times. But because the ball hits you in the stadium, you cannot go and claim compensation from the stadium authorities that you got hurt while sitting in the stadium. Why? Because you know that yes, there is a chance or a probability or possibility of the ball hitting me and causing harm to me. So I know that, and even after knowing that, I willingly give my consent and I go and watch the match. So if during that match it happens to me, then definitely I cannot claim compensation from the stadium, and the stadium can take the defense of consent. Now coming to the ingredients of defense of consent. So as I said that the plaintiff must be fully aware about the risk. So he must have the idea that yes, what are the risks? Then, being aware of the risk, the plaintiff gives consent for the same. And the consent of the plaintiff must be voluntary, free, without any coercion or influence or compulsion or master servant relationship. Right now, we all know that when we talk in legal, when we talk about consent, we mean that it should be free, voluntary, and free of coercion or influence as a valid consent, right? So, basically, let's say a master servant relationship. If I am working for some company or some minor, and my employer asked me to work in a mine. And during my working in the mine, all of a sudden, a crane picks up some stones and is going to throw it. The crane is taking the stones above my head, and the stones fall on my head and I get hurt. In this case, if I sue or claim damages from the my employer, he cannot take the ground that I have given a free and fair consent, or he cannot take the defense of consent, because here, because I am working with that person, so he has posted me there. It is not my valid consent, or it is not my voluntary consent that yes, I will be working under such situation. It is because I'm working for him. Wherever he throws me, I have to go there. So here there is no voluntary consent, and if I want to claim damages, I can claim damages from him. Another good example about this is where I will be dealing with the fourth ingredient, reasonable expectation, or the harm caused must not be beyond what a reasonable person would consider them as having assumed by their action. What it means is that generally when a patient goes for a surgery, the patient fills a consent form where the doctors inform him the patient about the possible risks of the surgery, what all consequences may be of the surgery, or the complications that the patient may feel after the surgery. And after knowing about the risks only, the patient signs the consent form. What is the need of that consent form? So that later on the patient cannot sue the doctor that yes, I was not aware about that, I hadn't given my consent and you operated me, so pay me compensation. No. But when we talk about what a reasonable person has given consent for example, the patient has gone for a kidney surgery, and the patient has given for the consent for a kidney surgery. But while doing the kidney surgery, the patient uterus was removed by the doctor. So later on, the patient can sue the doctor for removing his uterus because the patient had given consent for the treatment of his kidney. That is what the patient had given consent for, not for the other treatment. Like in the same way, usually we might have read many cases or many in many newspapers, even many a times such kind of incidents occur that during operations the doctor leave their gloves or their scissors or forceps, or they don't remove the clips from the body during surgery, after surgery, and those remain within the body of the patient. So in that cases the patient can sue the doctor for negligence and can claim compensation, because here the patient had given consent for the surgery and all the risks associated with the surgery or the complications which are associated for the surgery, provided that the doctor has taken reasonable care. But here, because of the negligence of the doctor left a seizure over there in his body. So here the doctor cannot take the defense of consent. He is liable to pay compensation. Okay. Any more questions?
No, sir.
So,
No, sir.
okay, any more doubts?
No, sir.
Okay.